Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah. So I would first like to say, after being away for 2 weeks and coming back on Monday night, coming back last night, how impressed I was that people stuck around. I think it's amazing. I just thought as soon as we got to the grammar with the declensions on the adjectives and the verb, the nouns and the verbs, and then the nouns and the adjectives. And all the rest, that we might lose a lot of people. But last night, if last night was any indication of what's going on here, people are sticking at it, fumbling along, but sticking at it. And I'm just so impressed that people are interested in this. And I'm learning a lot, and it's wonderful. I'm really enjoying it, even though it is tough. So I hope you guys are too. And next week is the last week. And so, as usual, as Martin will remind you later, in the last half hour, bring along a glass of wine or the tipple of your choice to have a bit of a drink. And also, if people are interested in continuing on, Martin's offering to do further studies if people are interested, and maybe with a longer format, and maybe slow things down a bit with a longer format, not just the 6 weeks. Maybe looking at doing a course where you actually learn Plato's Meno. So that's the end goal of the course.
Is that Zoom or face-to-face?
Well, we can talk about that. We can talk about it for sure. So next week, towards the end of the class, let's have a conversation about that, and the other group will too. Sorry?
That'll be great.
Oh, yeah, you're interested. Okay, that's great. That's great. Yeah. And even today, what really hit home for me today was you'll look at it today with Parmenides, looking at his statement about only being is and nothing is not, and that sort of stuff that Tim, we got to in the Melbourne School of Continental Philosophy course, but we also got to in the course we did in our school with the Sophists, which I know some people here have done. So where Plato reinterprets that and presents non-being as actually the other of being. So in that binary opposite form of same and other. And so there's that reinterpretation. So today, think about that when Martin takes you through that saying or that fragment from Parmenides. I think that's really interesting, especially where we find that nothing, the word that's usually translated as nothing, is actually literally not one. And you can relate that to the Parmenidean one, and then nothing is not one, and so same other, and how that turns up in Plato. So how you can relate Parmenides to Plato's solution to Parmenides. Remember where the Eleatic stranger says, I'm going to commit patricide, I'm going to kill my father and give a solution to this problem. So that's all that stuff's really interesting. And if we do advanced courses, we can come back to what we've been learning with Martin in this course, because there's lots of stuff that Martin's got us engaged with. Like today, you'll get into the verb to be in a big way, and the participle and the presenting it as a noun and all that stuff. Sorry, Martin, if I'm saying it the wrong way, but it's just really good if you're trying to get into this high philosophy of Plato, this hard stuff in his late dialogues. So there we go. Now, the other couple of things I wanted to mention is that we're going to have our Christmas breakup again this year. And that will be a morning thing on Saturday, the 18th of December. It'll be in Camberwell at 10:30, from 10:30 onwards. So if you can't get there right at 10:30, then anytime after 10:30 for a couple of hours in Camberwell. So RSVP to me or to anyone you know on the board, but I think most people have got my email. I'll put it up there in the chat before I go. And in the chat, I've put yeah, the basic details. So 10:30 Saturday, the 18th of December. I haven't put RSVP, but you'll need to RSVP to me because it usually books out. We don't want too many people. It's at a private home. So, but do come along, and you can bring a friend who's also interested in philosophy. So that would be really nice to see you there because I know the people in this class are really into their Greek philosophy and into Plato. So it'd be great. I'm sure we'll have lots of good chats there and move into more face-to-face meeting other than these Zoom meetings. So the last thing I wanted to say was that we're having problems with the website, and I was also having problems with access to the internet. So I got behind on the resources page, but now the resources page has been fixed up. So whereas you've been getting the recordings of the classes through Martin's emails, you can now find them all there on the resources page. And I'll keep that up to date from now on. I've put the revised versions of handout 1 and handout 2, and I'll put handout 3 up there as soon as I can. So that's, I think, all the announcements I had. So have a great class. And it's, yeah, as I said, it's really great to see that this has taken off. I really didn't think there'd be enough people interested for 2 classes to go right through to the end. And yeah, maybe if I can, I'll join you guys at 7:30 next week for a bit of a drink. So bye from me. Is there any questions, or Martin, is there anything else I needed to mention?
No, that's great. Thanks. That's all good.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. I'll leave you guys to it then.
Bye, Benny.
Okay. See ya.
Bye. So last night in the class that Bernie actually attended, we went a bit back and forward through some material that I've now sent out as part of a handout. So the order in which we do things may not seem premeditated, but that's because I was answering questions that people had about various word uses. And so I went ahead and translated a line or two of Parmenides to explain how 1 or 2 words work. So what I'm going to do is we introduce, so as usual, start with some grammar, then time off for good behavior. We'll look at a couple of illustrations of some of the things that the pre-Socratics got up to, and then we'll read some sentences. But on the way through the grammar, I'll be introducing a fragment from Parmenides, and hopefully we can do 1 or 2 of Heraclitus as well. But we are going to, so we do have a bit of a new syntax, which is the participle. And then next week, no new syntax. We'll revise a few things and then just look at a few sentences, and I'll provide some interpretations. And Bernie's just jumping back on, I think. So I'm just going to share my screen. So this is the 3rd and final handout. I've put all of the Greek that we've done together in here. That's got that chronology that I outlined last week, a few words on the pre-Socratics as a whole. And then next week, there's 2 interpretations of the first philosophers that I want to comment on. The first is by Aristotle, and I'll put a paragraph of him in, and then on Plato. And I've also put in a little excerpt from Cicero, who describes a couple of astronomical machines developed by the first philosophers. And people used to think that he was just making stuff up, and then they found one in 1903. And so we'll have a brief look at that because it's a rather remarkable piece of scientific equipment. And so, yeah, we'll discuss how Socrates criticizes the first philosophers next week. And I've put all the resources and grammar going back to the pronunciation of the letters into this handout. And I'll stop sharing and go back to the whiteboard. Okay, so yeah, does anyone have any questions about other things that we've done or things they looked at during the week that were difficult or anything like that that I can address? Okay, so a brief revision. Grammar depends upon knowing what the elements of the sentence are, and our term for that is the parts of speech. So would you be able to provide me with the parts of speech, that is the kinds of words and their uses? So,
Subject and predicate.
yeah, so those are important grammatical functions to be an object or a predicate. So, yeah, to express a thought, you need a subject and a predicate. Yep. The subject's what you're talking about, and the predicate's what you say of it. And the predicate, the core of which is a verb, which may itself take a direct object. And it could also have an indirect object. So, yeah, the tyrant gave a speech, direct object, speech, to Parliament, indirect object. Okay, but so the parts of speech, so that's a foundational syntax. But the parts of speech are the kinds of words. So
Nouns and adjectives and adverbs and that sort of thing.
that's all, yeah. So we have nouns which do what? What do they show? What do
Name.
they, sorry?
A name?
Yeah, they name anything. Person, place, thing, concept, whatever. They name a thing. And then we also have,
Verbs.
and what do verbs do?
Describe an action.
Right. Strictly speaking, the grammars will say also a state, just because there are verbs like being and becoming, which it's hard to describe as an action. So other parts of speech?
Pronouns,
Pronouns, which do what?
identify a noun. It's a noun. It's a form of a noun.
So, yeah, they usually
They point out a noun, like
yeah. So they usually have two functions. One is they point it out, and if you say this understanding or that car or whatever, and the this or that is a demonstrative pronoun, but there it's functioning as an adjective.
all right,
Whereas,
gender. It denotes gender.
it will need, it does. It has to agree with the noun in gender, case, and number. Yes, yeah, but just on its use. So if I say, read this, that's different from saying read this book. So this is a pronoun and it can replace a noun. If you say this is unacceptable, and we have to know what this is to understand that sentence. Whereas you can also use it as an adjective, like, this book is tediously long or something. So there are a number of words that can be used as different parts of speech, and the part of speech that they are fulfilling in a sentence, that's what their syntax is in that sentence. They could be and we have words that are spelled exactly the same that could be 3 or 4 parts of speech. Like if I say bank, like on the riverbank, that's a noun, which is governed by the preposition on. If I say don't bank on that, it's a verb. Okay, so we have and more parts of speech.
Subject.
So that's a grammatical category, which is one of the fundamental ones. Yeah, so every sentence has to have a subject and a predicate. And the subject is usually, if it's indicated in the sentence, it'll be a noun. Yeah. But just in terms of the parts of speech, it's just this finicky grammatical term for the kinds of words. Sorry?
Conjunction.
Conjunction. And what do conjunctions do?
Like and, but, they join things together.
Yeah, they connect words, phrases, and clauses. So the ones we've had thus far are kai and de. Kai means and. It can also be used to mean even or also. Kai means and de is and or but. Now, some of these conjunctions are used in coordination, and when we say in English, both this and that, in Greek, you will have kai, this, kai, and that, both this and that. And there's another version, which is te, kai, and you can also just have te. And Parmenides has this combination, so we'll see an example later on tonight.
Do they
So-
mean the same thing?
Those,
Yeah, the te and the ke, as opposed to the ke and the ke. Kai.
almost, they mean almost exactly the same thing. There are situations where you might sort of sense a nuance, and
Thank you.
some of them just in a particular author, this will mean more of a pair, and this just means both this and that. But you can confidently translate it, any combination of te or kai, when it's doubled up, as both this and that.
Lovely. Thank
Yeah.
Adverb, we haven't said adverb yet.
Exactly. So adverb, which does what?
It qualifies the verb.
Right. And in Greek, most adverbs end in os, the same way as in English, they often end in ly. So he runs slowly, they speak poorly, and so on. And in Greek, os, kaklos, so lege, he or she speaks badly. Okay, any more? So we have, yeah, we need more.
Preposition,
Right, and what does a preposition do?
I forgot.
So it's prepositioned, and it's a word that stands in front of a noun and introduces the noun into the sentence. So you can say on the riverbank, around the castle, and then they have these spatial or temporal senses, through the forest and so on, but they usually also have metaphorical senses. So there's an adverb, dia, and we often have words that come from this, and it means through. Usually takes a genitive. They cut through the ocean or something, but we have versions of it. For example, the diameter is the measure through the middle of the circle, and so on. And a diagram is something made up of lines. A grammaire is a line. Parmenides uses dia a couple of times, as we'll see. For example, if you persuaded someone, dia logu. So paithor, paith is the act of persuasion. Ace is the second person singular ending. You are. So you are persuading dia logu through a speech, by means of a speech. Okay, and we have one more part of speech, which doesn't appear in English, which is
Particle.
particles. And it's not an extremely clear distinction between particles and other words, because they have a kind of adverbial sense, and so they are sometimes called sentence adverbs because they modify the tone of a sentence rather than modifying just one word like the verb. And also they act as conjunctions. And so the main example we've had is men, der, which to over translate means on the one hand this and on the other hand that. Extremely common, and there's a couple of idioms that have grown up around it that I want to explain now. So are we familiar enough now with the definite article as being ho, he, to in the masculine, feminine, and neuter? Is that familiar? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So a very frequent idiom is the definite article with men and then the definite article with der. And it would usually be, you have to think in a word like human being or man. If it's the masculine article, it could be men or a group mixed of men and women and children. If it's women only, it'll be the feminine article. But so that the typical case is the masculine, and that would be, one man does something or other, but another does something else. So the one and the other.
So they're separated by a verb.
I'm sorry?
So they're separated by a verb.
By a verb.
And yeah.
Yeah, sorry. There's a whole sentence that could go in here. So, one man, goes to fight in the war, and the other stays at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in English, if you had on the one hand, blah, 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 but on the other hand, blah, 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 the one hand and the other hand, they would be similar to the particle use in Greek, wouldn't they?
Yes. Yeah, it's exactly that kind of balancing of this in comparison with that. Yes. And often you try and not use the phrases on the one hand on the other, just because there's sometimes more concise ways of indicating the contrast, but that's the exact sense. On the one hand this, on the other hand that. So it could be hoi men, and then hi, yeah. And that would be, the men do this, but the women do that.
Okay. Well, so when in English you've got a word like moreover governs the whole sentence, doesn't it? I mean, moreover, New South Wales is north of Victoria, something like that. Would that be particle-like in that sense?
Yes, it would. It would. And there are particles like un that fill that role. So actually, in particular, one called eti is Aristotle's one of his most favorite particles. Furthermore, or moreover.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you? Let's say that the thing about an indicative sentence is that it can be true or false, can't it? Whereas if you've just got a noun can't be true by itself, nor can an adverb, but you need a subject and a predicate for something to be true or false. My question then is, does a particle ever change the truth value of an indicative sentence?
It changes the meaning, but it won't change the truth value.
No, so it's like but, isn't it? So if you say it was a very fine day, but it was the only one, the but changes your expectation, but it doesn't actually change the truth value, does it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So they indicate those kind of relations between different clauses or sentences. That's right. But it's the verb that indicates whether we're talking about a fact, like in an indicative sentence, or whether we're talking about something that's an object of will or desire, like an imperative, like an order, or a hope.
So if you just boiled them all down to symbolic logic, they'd all just come down to and, wouldn't they? And this, and this, and that, and that. Well, I think that's what particles do.
You would have boiled away a good deal of life and
Yes.
be left with the dead bones, but yes.
Yes, well, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so just a development of that use is as follows. I'm going to provide an example. I introduced before this verb poiet or, which means to do or make. Fundamentally, it means make. It can also mean do. And it used to have this vowel as part of the stem. And it has that spelling in Heraclitus. But by classical times, people got tired of pronouncing multiple vowels in a row. Oi, e, or. And this is true of noun endings and verb endings and all words, that when you have multiple vowels in a row that have to be pronounced differently, you end up contracting some of them or eliding, taking out some of them. And that happened with this, so that it actually ends up being pronounced poior, and the epsilon is just assimilated to the omega. And so in the third person singular, it's poie. So is that ending familiar? A, like lege, he or she speaks. Is that ending?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so nomos, which is the law, and it's in the nominative. It's got that. It's a masculine word, as we can tell from the article, and it's in the nominative singular. So the law. Poie, third person singular of the verb poie or, I do or I make. So he, she, it makes. In this case, we know the subject because the noun is in the nominative. So the law makes. And then we have this mende construction. So TUES men. So the definite article, which, I mean, we did only look at it, I think, last week, maybe the week before, but so I don't know if the endings are extremely clear, but TUES, which is also second declension in its formation, and that's masculine accusative plural. So, like, for example, if we had hoi, logoi, or TUES, logus. So that means the speeches as the subject of a sentence, and that means the speeches as the object of a, sorry, the object of a verb. The subject of a verb, the object of a verb. So TUES, men, is something like, some people or some men. So the law makes TUES men. Some, and you have to think it, you have to supply the noun that the TUES refers to. So it could be anthropos, some human beings, or it could be andras, some men, right? But you have to supply the noun that's being indicated by the definite article. So TUES men, just think anthropos, some people. The law makes some agathus, good. And the ending, us, agrees in case, number, and gender with the article that goes with men. So the law makes some good, TUES de, but some kakus, bad. Can I?
Who said
can I-
that?
Sorry,
Who said that one? Who said
I just made it up to illustrate this usage.
So you're the famous philosopher that said that.
Well, yeah, it's also a fairly ordinary observation on normal communal existence, but yeah,
It's a bit of a black thought there.
yeah, yeah. I'll try and develop more cheerful and sprightly messages with it. I'll get away from the tyranny of the laws.
Playing on your name there, your surname.
Oh, yeah. But so syntactically, if we depart from the Weltschmerz that led to it, how is that as an understandable sentence?
Once you've explained it, it's good.
Okay. Okay, good. Good.
It's like one of those statements that are engraved in courts of law, you know.
Solon's laws were actually
Mm.
engraved and left outside the. Okay, so I want to look at the verb Amy. Now, Amy literally means I am, but for some reason, conventionally in dictionaries, the Greek is always in the first person singular, Amy, whereas in English dictionaries you have the infinitive form, so to be. That's the translation of this word. I'll just run through quickly the endings. We've only done that once before, but we really only need the third person singular and the third person plural for what we're going to look at. So Amy means I am. A, you are. Esti or Eston. He, she, it is. Esmond, first person plural, so we are. You are, sorry. You in the plural, so all of you are. And Asen, they are. What we really need is Esti. He, she, it is, and AC, they are. Now we've also had the infinitive, and for the verb to be, it's Ainai. So the verb has four moods: the indicative, which is the mood of facts. There are two to do with wishes and desires, which we're not looking at, the subjunctive and the optative. We're not looking at that. We have looked at the imperative in the regular verbs, not Amy, which means an order to do something. And those endings are e in the singular and ete in the plural. So lege means speak and trekete means run, addressed to more than one person. So we've had the imperative, we've had the indicative mood, and there are two other forms of the verb, and then the whole verb is outlined. And those two forms are the noun form and the adjectival form of a verb. The noun form is this. The infinitive is the nominal or noun form because it talks about the action as a thing. So that's the action of being, to be. And sometimes you'll see in Greek, many words are turned into a noun by use of the article. And you'll very frequently see it with the infinitive. It's called an articular infinitive because it has an article and the infinitive. So if you have the neuter article top plus ani, and that means something like being. In the same way that top legain, that means the act of speaking or just speaking. Can I clarify or provide more examples about any of that? Is there any question that?
Yes, please, Martin. Can you repeat the plural, second person, third person? Those bottom two of the plurals on the left.
This here?
Eston, yeah. So first person Esmond, is it?
Yeah, Esmond, we are.
We are.
Yeah, so yeah, we could say
And then
Esmond Agathoi, we are good. Esther, you are in the plural. And then Asen, but only with the new if there's no consonant following. But would you want some examples, or was it just
the
seeing
last
it?
one? Yeah. So how's that spelled again? That's, I can't see it very well.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so Asen is. I'll do it larger.
All right, thanks.
So AC, kakoi, they are bad. Or yeah. And then there's no nu because that's a consonant.
Thank you.
So the infinitive is the nominal form of the verb because you're speaking about the verb, the action of the verb as a thing, reading, writing, running, and so on. With there's an adjectival form of the verb, which is called the participle. And I'm going to need more space for this. So the participle indicates that the subject is participating, that's why it's called the participle, in a certain action. Right? So it's not the main verb, it's just describing it in an adjectival way while it performs the main action. And before
tenses?
I'm sorry?
Would that have to do with tenses? As in the past tense,
Actually, it's like in English, the present participle describes you as, I can't really give you an example until I give you the endings.
okay.
And
okay.
I'll immediately do that as soon as I go through.
Okay,
But-
sure, sorry.
Yeah, no, we normally translate it by ing, like so running, reading. So if you said running, he fell, that's a participle describing the subject. But that's the main verb, right? That's the indicative verb. This is the action, he fell. Now we would say something like while running, because he was running, if he was running, although he was running, although he was running, because he was running, he fell. Now, Greek just has this one word, the participle, which could indicate any of those, and you have to understand it from the context. But so just the relation with time, the present participle denotes an action that occurs at the same time as the main verb. We're only doing present tense verbs in this whole course, so we don't have to worry about the other tenses. But in this case, that's a past tense. That's a present participle. It indicates that he was running at the time he fell. But we don't have to worry too much about that because we're sticking purely to the present tense, where while someone is doing one thing, they are doing something else. That's the main verb. That's very abstract, but I'll develop some hopefully more concrete examples when I get some endings. So as an adjectival form of the verb, it is going to agree with a noun, and therefore it has to have case, gender, and number like any other adjective. It also has tense. So there were past participles, future participles. We're only interested in the present participle. So the participle, it has voice, so active, middle, and passive. It has tense, but it doesn't have person. It also has, like an adjective, gender, case, and number. So I'll run through the endings for the verb Amy, to be, in the participle. And so the participle for to be is something like being. In various contexts, you would translate it, although he was, that is, he was in being, although he was, he passed away or something. But I'll try and find a better example when I get this done. So we have the singular, nominative, and we have to have masculine, feminine, and neuter.
So what you're putting up now, Martin, is all in the present, right?
I'm sorry?
What you're putting up now is going to be all in the present.
Yes, so this is the present. So the verb to be, Amy, only has an active voice, right? Because to be is an activity, or an activity, an energeia. It's an actuality. It's not something performed on you. It's something that everything that is exhibits. So there's no passive. There's only the active. So, and we're looking at the endings, therefore, for the in the active voice and the present tense participle. Now, I'm doing it for this irregular verb, Amy, and the verb to be, I am, you are, and so on, is always irregular because it's so frequently used that inconsistencies creep in every language, and that's why you just have to learn it off by heart. But the endings for the participle for Amy, you can just add them to any verb, and then you have the present active participle. So once I put them up, I can just use them on other verbs that we actually are more familiar with. So being, when it's a masculine noun in the nominative singular, is on. When it's a feminine in the nominative singular, it's usa, and when it's a neuter, on. Now, we've seen nouns of the first and second declension. And in Greek, there are three declensions, three patterns in which nouns form their endings. The first declension is ending in an alpha or an eta, and this participle ends in an alpha, and it follows the normal first declension endings. So I'll do that first. So usa, uses, user with the iota subscript, and usan. Usai, gender plural, always on. Usas, usas. Now, for our purposes, we're really only interested in the neuter nominative singular and nominative plural. So these are the endings. Everything else, I'm introducing it to you, and if you go on to look at other books and other courses, then hopefully it's of some help. But we're not going to have to use all these endings. I just want to introduce it, completely, And then we're going to make use especially of those and one or two of the masculine. Okay, so the third pattern of endings is called the third declension. And its typical endings are, you don't know what it is in the nominative. In the genitive, it's os, dative e. In the accusative, you also don't know what it is because it depends on the nominative. Although in the masculine, it's frequently alpha. In the plural, it's es, on, like everything is, C, and us. So on, I'll start with the masculine. So on, and then in the genitive, it's ontos, with the typical third declension ending. So the stem has changed from on to ont, and then the endings just follow. For the third declension endings just follow on the end of that. So the dative, so 2 or 4, something that's in being, onti, onta, ontes, ontorn, the C has contracted with the tau, and the Omicron has lengthened, so it's usi is the dative plural, and then ontas.
So sorry, are these all for the verb to be?
Yes.
So the verb has several different, is a verb that exists in 3 different classes, both masculine, singular, and neuter.
Yeah. So
Because
when
most
I was-
nouns are just in one class, aren't they?
I'm sorry.
Most nouns are just in one class. They're either a masculine noun or a feminine noun or
Exactly right. Exactly right. So a noun has a gender. That's part of the word.
Yeah.
And we recognize it when we see the article.
yes.
So that, but an adjective has to have all of the genders.
Oh, these are adjectives.
Yeah. So, and this is the adjectival form of the verb. So it has to have
Right.
gender, case, and number.
Yes,
Or it has to have
of course.
all of them, so it can describe any kind of noun
Yes.
as being in being.
Yep.
Okay, so the neuter is always the easiest of the 3 genders to learn because it always follows the masculine and the genitive and the dative. So ontos, onti, and it's always the same in the nominative and the accusative, exactly like Latin. And in the plural, again, same in the nominative and the accusative. Otherwise, it follows the masculine. And in the plural, every neuter noun, with a few very annoying exceptions, ends in alpha, as this one does. So, onta, ontorn, usi, and onta. Now, what we really need for our purposes is this, and this, and I can now begin to provide some examples that might help, I hope. Now, to do that, I want to rub that out. Is that?
Go for it.
Oh. Martin, you will send it out, won't you?
Yeah, actually, just a few minutes before we started, I sent out the third handout, which has all of this in it.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I was at the dentist. Sorry, I was late.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. And I sent a link out too, which is
Yes.
a 15-minute video from the Joint Associate Classical Teachers, whatever, on the participle, which is a, reasonably helpful one, I think.
Thank you.
So we wanted this, the masculine in the singular, born, and the neuter in the singular, and we want the plural for the neuter. Okay. So this is it's an adjectival form of the verb. It means something like being, and like anything else, if you put an article in front of it, you turn it into a noun. So very frequently in Greek, you'll see something like in the philosophers, to on, which means being. And in the plural, ta onta. The being.
So this is where ontology comes from.
Exactly. That comes from the genitive ontos plus logos. Exactly.
Okay.
So ontology, the study of being. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I mean, the language is slightly awkward in English. We have a different way of expressing these, and ours has been fundamentally reformed by people who made use of the notion of existence. It's fundamentally distinct from being in the way the Greeks discuss it. So it's complicated. And so our language doesn't transparently reflect these concepts, but I'll just try and explain what they mean more simply. So to on means that which is. And so it could mean, that's what's true. That's what is the case, the true being of things. And the beings means the things which are. I mean, these are just variations on the indicative use of the verb to be. But that's abstract. I'll use some of the verbs that we're a bit more familiar with, and hopefully I can make more sense. So that's the participle ending in the masculine nominative plural. Trekein is to run. So trekon, running. And you could have a noun. So that's the nominative. It's a masculine noun in the nominative singular. So it has to be the subject of the sentence or in agreement with the subject. So a human being running. We don't have a sentence yet. We have an adjectival form of the verb telling us that the subject is doing something, but we don't have an action or a state in an indicative verb. So we don't have a sentence. So apothneske, does anyone recall apothnesko? We had that we just looked at it for 15 seconds when we did some Thales, but so it means, so apothnesko means I am dying.
Yeah, dying, yeah.
Dying. So trekon anthropos, a human being running is dying or dies. Now to make that, we have to make that into intelligible English. So we would normally add a word describing the relation between the activity that the human being is undertaking and the action of the main verb. So while running, a human being dies or is dying, or because he is running. So while, because, if, although. So although he is running, he is dying. If he's running, he's dying. And so these four ways of indicating the relation between the action that describes the subject and the action indicated by the main verb. Now that's a lot of syntax, and there are, grammars spend hundreds of pages on this. We just want to look at one or two uses of the participle, and that will get us through all the Greek that we have remaining. So I hope that's not an overwhelming tidal wave of syntax.
So Martin, can I just ask you a question?
Please.
In your man who's running and dying,
Yes.
in ancient Greek, you don't have to put all those additional words in there, do you?
No.
Really?
No.
And yeah, you don't, because the more I read it, like, you don't have to put anything else. It's conceptual, and then you expand on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to make decisions based on the context of how you'll translate it.
Yep.
So someone running dies. That's the fundamental sentence. And yeah, to the context will often indicate, oh, it's despite the fact he was running. So although he is running, he's dying.
No, that's right. Yep.
So,
Could
yeah.
could that
So-
also be somewhat poetic, that, just even as life goes on, you're in the midst of dying? Or something like that.
Yeah.
It can be interpreted all different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is
Yeah.
much more scope.
Yep.
Not just for leaving open scope for interpretation, but for deliberately having 3 or 4 intended senses. And
Yes.
I hope to indicate that when we look at some of the Heraclitus. But but the participles are an incredibly important part of the language, and they use much more frequently than in English. And
Yep.
because they can set up these complex relations between what someone has done or is doing, and then and its relation between that and the main verb, the action described by the main verb.
They're actually also used in modern Greek.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we have them in English, but they're not used as much. I don't know about modern Greek.
Mm.
Okay, so that's all I wanted to introduce, and we can use that, and we'll look at some of the Parmenides, because we skipped ahead to the Parmenides from Heraclitus last night. So I just want to have just some relief from the syntactical hard work. I'm just going to share my screen again. So I put a few words of interpretation about the first philosophers on this handout. Sorry, I just have to. Okay, I put some words of interpretation on the front of this handout, and I just wanted to show you a couple of things to indicate something of the character of something of the theoretical aspect of the first philosophers. And I'm just going to change illustration. And the main point, the main suggestion I want to make is this: the pre-Socratics were picked up by the early moderns as being the genuine philosophers. So the early moderns, Bacon, Descartes, Locke, Hobbes, and so on, they reject the classical tradition and the Christian tradition, and they want to replace that with what they take to be the true philosophy. And to do that, they went back behind Plato and Aristotle to the pre-Socratics. And the reason why they did that was because for the pre-Socratics, it appears to the moderns that physics, natural science, is the key to all the sciences, or as Bacon says, the mother of the sciences. And Descartes, in one of the most fundamental works of modern philosophy and modern existence, the Discourse on Method, in the 6th part of that, he says, it was only when I made advances in my physics that I could see a way to a practical philosophy. And he's deliberately rejecting, and he says explicitly, I'm rejecting speculative or theoretical philosophy. And that's a key to the difference between ancient and modern philosophy. For the ancients, both the pre-Socratics and the classics like Aristotle, Xenophon, and Plato, for all of them, theory is the highest human activity. And that's so because the world is a cosmos. It's an ordered whole that's understandable by the human mind. Now, the moderns make a very intricate break with this tradition. They reject the notion that the world is intelligible. And they make physics the first science and the mother of all the sciences as it is now. Like if you're in a university, they don't, if as like myself, you have taught in the humanities, you are of course among the soft sciences because there's a hard one, right? There's a genuine science, and then there's you peripheral people fiddling about with your little literature and stuff, right? So that's, physics is the core of science, then chemistry, then biology, and so on down to you pathetic people doing history and literature and so on. So that's our current self-understanding, and that's based upon Bacon and Descartes. And so Descartes is saying, and Bacon are saying, nature is not intelligible. Theory is not the highest thing. But that's not a cause for despair. It's actually the cause of our hope, because although it's not intelligible, it can be manipulated. And we can impose new forms upon it and make new technology. Descartes' phrase was an infinity of devices. And now we have an infinity of devices, right? Descartes said an infinity of devices to have the goods of the earth without labor, which is his little sort of a joking reversal of the story of the Garden of Eden. We will have the fruits of the earth without labor, as opposed to being ejected and having to work and so on. Right, so there are no theoretical objects for modern natural science. The highest thing in it is the construction of theory. But theory doesn't mean seeing things. The theory is the construction of universal laws that you then test on the phenomena that allow you to manipulate the inherently unintelligible nature in order to produce cars, nuclear weapons, vaccines, and so on. Now, so I make that lengthy preface just so I can try to illustrate this point with some of the pre-Socratics, that for them, theory genuinely was the highest thing. And I just offer this following example, and I'll send around the link. The BBC has a 5-minute clip on this invention that I'm going to introduce you to, and I'll send that around so you can see a bit more detail. So Cicero, as I reproduced in the handout, talks about an invention of Archimedes by which Archimedes could predict the position of any star or planet at any day, at any time of any year. And yeah, no, obviously he was ridiculed for making this outlandish assertion until in 1903, they found a shipwreck in the Mediterranean that had what these things, which look like, clumps of encrusted, broken something or other. But someone was intelligent enough to think that this is something more intricate than we think, and they rebuilt it, and it looks like this. And it is actually able to show accurately the positions of the 5 planets that they recognized at the time. I think we're up to 9 or something, and show them in relation to the Earth and the other stars and so on. And you can, there's many online sites, including a museum which has the original on, which are worth looking at. So this is Archimedes, whose fundamental belief is that the mind is open to the whole. So the human being, who is the microcosm, is open to the cosmos as a whole. And the highest life, because there is that relation, the highest life is the life of thinking. And to reproduce an anecdote from his life, he was apparently, when Syracuse was invaded by the Romans, there's a story in Diogenes Laertius that he was doing geometry on the beach, and a Roman soldier told him to leave or to become a prisoner or something. And Archimedes said, I'm going to finish this calculation. And the Romans stabbed him. So someone did a nice 19th century inside illustration of this, but in Diogenes, it's on the beach. Okay, so that's...
I think he said Mintus Mintus cyclus tarate did not ruin my circles.
Right. Yeah, there's another good one. There's a somewhat cranky cynic philosopher called Diogenes, who is reputed to have told Alexander the Great, "Can you get out of the way? You're blocking the sun from my..." But so that's why, if you look at modern scientists and people who study modern science, are often, models of intellectual rigor, and it's wonderful to read someone like Heisenberg talk about science and what its meaning is and so on. But there's this real inner tension. I make this blanket suggestion, which I'm happy to have rejected, that modern scientists can't explain the love of the truth that their own practice of science embodies. And just an example that I happen to be familiar with is, Stephen Hawking wrote that book on, which I now forget, on the origins of the cosmos. And he tries to describe why people do science, why he does it. And he says, well, it could be evolutionary, that it's more useful to figure out how things work. And then he himself provides the obvious counterexample. On the other hand, we figured out how to make nuclear weapons, which could destroy us. So that's not an evolutionary advantage. And then he says, well, it's just human beings have always longed to know things. That's completely insufficient, right? Someone of his great intellect cannot justify his own central activity. And that's why, Tali says, the hardest thing is self-knowledge, because your understanding of yourself as a thinking being must somehow understand the cosmos as thinkable, as intelligible. Okay, that's my interpretive suggestion, and that gives us.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have any response or refutation or qualification.
We're thinking.
Okay.
Just thinking about the difference between, if you like, the ideas in your head, the very classic Plato and forms and stuff is all about the concept of something in your head,
Yeah.
Which is intimately related to the reality, as Plato sees it, of the world. But the sciences, particularly, and the more this time goes on, the more this becomes apparent, become more and more like the same as Plato, in the sense that we've got ideas that start off as practical, empirical sort of concepts, like Newton's laws. But now, as we get more and more towards past Einstein and now into quantum stuff, it's becoming more and more mathematical and non-real. And there's an argument in mathematics now about whether is maths real or made up, for example. That's a really big discussion point at the moment. And that's verging on saying, is maths in your head made up, which probably, well, is it in your head as a form, which Plato would say, or is it sort of made up in some other way, rather than being truly there always in everyone's mind? But they seem to be merging. I'm not sure there's such a big distinction in the end between it. They started off with big distinctions, and, the idea of machines and so on as being completely separate from the mind, and all the bad consequences of Descartes in the sense of mind-body separation, which is probably becoming more and more seen as not the case, that we are becoming closer and closer to mind and body as part and parcel of the same thing. So I'm just not sure there's such a strong distinction between the two.
Okay, so that's a good statement, and I want to offer an alternative. And then we can either discuss more or because the mathematics fundamentally changes with the early moderns from being something taken to be an abstraction from what actually is. So the only reason, just the simplest thing, arithmos is a number, and it means a number, well, there's no number one, right? There's unity. So if a thing has to be unified for it to be intelligible, it has to be separated from other things. So that's a book, you're a human being, that's a tree, because you're separated and distinct, which means unified in some way. So one is the principle of number, it's not a number. So the unity is the principle of counting, because there are a countable number of intelligible entities. Now, starting with Descartes onwards, number is abstracted from things. There's no necessary
count.
Sorry?
So it's something that you count.
Yeah, but it's a tool that doesn't necessarily have it has no connection with things. And that's why we have this discussion in mathematics about which they use the term Platonic and non-Platonic, as you say, like are numbers real or are they constructions? And it seems like there's an article I'm familiar with called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, because modern mathematics is highly effective, but we don't know what it refers to. And given the enormously odd character of like post-Euclidean geometry and so on, it's difficult to say that it refers to things, but it is enormously powerful as a tool for understanding our world in a certain way. But that's where I'd want to qualify your suggestion by saying I think there is more of a break, but I'm just taking a different view. And yeah, what would be wonderful one day is to discuss together. There's a philosopher called Jacob Klein, who wrote a book called Greek Mathematical Thought and the Origin of Algebra. And he's focused upon the character of that change in mathematics as a change in our understanding of what it means to be. Future reference.
Martin, can you put that title up so I can see that again, please?
Sorry.
All right, hang on, I'll take a photo of it. Hang on.
Hang on, let's put it back so you can see the name. It's not the easiest read. He's written a series of essays that are more accessible and, just on what is number, ancient and modern. And he's very elusive and intricate, but I think extremely worthwhile. Okay, so let us look at Parmenides, and this is B6 it's in the third handout, and I'm going to write it all up here, so you don't have to look at that now. But so I'll just start. So this references the main edition in the 20th century of the pre-Socratics. It has all the direct quotes that they call fragments that they think are original in their B sections, and they number them after that. So in any pre-Socratic fragments book, it should refer to this Diels Crans numbering system, so that you can look it up. So we're looking at B6 from Parmenides, and just a quick word on impersonal verbs. So we've had before day. So there's the verb deor means I bind, I tie up. Day means it's binding upon someone to do something, and the usual translation is it is necessary to do something. And there's another one, créer, which means exactly the same thing. There's a slight difference in nuance, so perhaps this one, créer, is more like one ought to do something. So both of them are called impersonal verbs because they don't tell you in the verb the person who ought to do something. What they just say is it is necessary. One ought to do such and such. And in English and in Greek, an impersonal verb like that requires an infinitive. So you know what the thing is that you have to do. Right? So they both take. And so it could be, for example, fair the game. It's necessary to speak. Or day. Okay. It's necessary to run. One must run. Is that clear? I've done that very quickly, but can I answer any questions or?
Yes.
So what's the
Sorry?
No, go ahead.
what's the difference between the two?
So if I say it's necessary, that's stronger and it has a more objective sense. Like this is just what necessarily occurs, the same way that gravity occurs and fire goes up and so on. If I say one ought, that's more of a almost like a moral demand. You know, one ought to treat people decently or something like that. So it is a nuance, and often you can just translate them the same and you won't get it wrong. But there is this nuance difference.
I felt that has more of a sense of that there is a need to. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that does, because it
There is a
ultimately
need to.
its root is krao, which is I need. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And in Greek, so one word for thing is krema, which in the plural is kremata, and that's money, right? The needful.
Oh, yes.
Right. The necessary,
Martin,
Yeah.
these seem to be verging on being a Greek equivalent to Germanic modal verbs. And I wonder if there is a Greek equivalent of can, I can run, I can read.
Yes. And that's usually in the octative, so which we're not looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I'm just trying to. Yeah, and there's a verb, dunamai. I am able, or I can, but it doesn't have a impersonal sense. You have the personal endings on that, so that's different.
So it seems to be that is, Greek doesn't seem to need a modal verb. For instance, what about doing the future? I will run. A lot of people have pointed out that English doesn't actually have a future tense. What it's got is just a modal verb as a substitute. I'm assuming Greek has got a true future tense.
Yeah. So this verb luo, I am releasing, or I release. So if you've learned that, you'll also know the future, because the only difference is the sigma in the ending. Luso, I will release.
Yeah.
And then in the aorist, which has a sigma and alpha in most of the endings and an epsilon at the front, elusa, I released. And so you've got all these temporal endings indicated by changes in the endings, whereas in English, as you say, we have to add words, add modal verbs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the verb is the hardest thing to learn because it has all of these intricacies embedded in the endings. But once you learn it, you can see why Greek is so much more concise than English. And once you've learned the paradigms, you can use that with all of the verbs. And whereas with English, you have to learn a lot more words and word order and other things that are quite difficult to assimilate. Whereas because word order doesn't matter in Greek, if you learn the endings, you learn the relation between the terms that are being used.
Martin,
Yep.
what is the little dot called? You've taken me back so far. It's the semicolon type thing, but what is the little dot? Have you got a dot next to ST after on? No?
That dot. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that raised dot is the equivalent of our full colon.
Semicolon.
Yeah.
Oh, full colon. Okay.
Yeah. Or a
Oh,
semicolon.
blast from the past.
Yeah,
Blast from the
semicolon or
past.
full colon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is complicated, but we'll go through it letter by letter and word by word and hopefully become clearer. So it starts with crei, so a demand. It's necessary and we expect an infinitive. And we have legain. Now we have te and te. So we've got it's necessary both to do this and to do that. And the things that we're being asked to do they happen to precede the conjunction. They don't always. It just that's variable. But in this case, they do. So it's necessary both to say and to think. So we had nous, the intellect or the mind. And as I mentioned before, when there are two vowels pronounced separately together, they often contract or form a diphthong. And so in Athens, this became nous, and everywhere eventually. Now, that's the noun, mind or intellect. The verb, which is to think, nowhere or. So I think, nowhere ace, you think, nowhere a, he or she or it is thinking. But again, the ending has contracted with the personal ending, so it becomes no or and no ace and no a, and that's what we've got the infinitive, no a. So it's necessary to say and to think, and hoti is a conjunction that means that. So are we okay thus far? Is there anything I can elaborate on esti? So esti, third person singular of the verb ami, to be, meaning he, she, it is. And that's the subject. So it's necessary to say and to think that being is. Not a transparently understandable assertion, but we'll try and fill it out as we go. So it's necessary to say and to think that being, and that's the neuter in the nominative singular of the verb to be in the participle, being is. And then gar is a conjunction, which means something like because. The traditional translation is for, but it's not used very frequently in English. You know, I went to the shop for I was hungry. It's just not very common, but it's difficult to find an alternative because it frequently is at the beginning of a sentence, and in English it's not considered appropriate to begin every sentence with the word because. So for or because, esti, so he, she, it is. But it can also have a broader sense of there is, anai, there is being. So he's just, that's meant to explain something. He's just explained one mysterious statement with another. So it's necessary to say and to think that being is for, there is to be, there is being. Madden, okay. So the word for one is hen in the neuter, one. And the word for no or not is either ook, or ook, or mer. I just have to get some space. legomen. We are not speaking. Mer is used more for the other moods, for orders, for things that might chance to be objects of desire or possibility, rather than for assertions. So mer, but it equally means, exactly like u, it means no or not. And so you use it for an order. So mer lege, don't speak. Or in the plural, legete, don't speak, but addressed to more than one person. So it's no or not, exactly like u. So uden and merden mean literally, to over translate, not even one. So, and not even one, they mean, they're from normal translated as nothing. Yeah, not even one means nothing. So merden, nothing. Yeah, so for there is to be, but nothing is not. There is no nothing. So you can't say it and you can't think it. Right.
You need to go again with that one. The last bit.
Yeah. I have introduced this without looking much more. Let me just share the screen again and I'll get back to the handout. So I've put a little excerpt from a comment by Alexander, a commentator on Aristotle, who in his metaphysics is makes this orientating remark about Parmenides. So, which I'll read. Parmenides, son of Pyrrhus of Elia, came after Xenophanes and went on both paths, and he will explain what that means. He both declares that the or is always or is eternal, and attempts to give an account of the coming to be of the beings. Not because he holds the same opinion about both, that is, that they're eternal and they come to be, but because he understands the or to be one, ungenerated and spherical in truth, but he makes two principles in the opinion of the many to give an account of phenomena, fire and earth. The latter as matter and the other as cause and making. Okay, so that's a comment on the fact that what we have of Parmenides is a poem, and we only have possibly a quarter of it. And the poem has the following structure. It begins with this fragment that I've just translated here. He's in a chariot being carried by mares, horses, guided by daughters of the sun who have pushed aside their veils. He's carried out to the crux of the cosmos at the gates of night and day. The goddess Justice lets him through, and then he goes on to describe the following scenario. There are two ways of thinking, either that being is or that it is not. And it's not possible to say or to think that nothing is. And so therefore the only path of truth is that being is. And then in the second half of this poem, he describes what most human beings experience, the phenomena that we understand, that there is a cosmos made up of different things that are constantly changing and elements are being exchanged and so on. And Alexander has tried to make sense of that by saying he's giving two explanations. There's the truth, and then there's the opinion of the many. And we'll spend some more time on this next week. And this is the fragment that we're now discussing, these words here. So he says after that fragment that we've just discussed, I bid you to think over these things, because from the first way of inquiry, I hold you back, I restrain you. Then thereafter from this way, on which mortals who know nothing wander astray, two-headed, for a lack of resourcefulness in their breasts steers a wandering intellect, and they are carried on both deaf and blind, stunned, understanding tribes, for whom to be and not to be are held to be the same and not the same. And the path of all is backward turning, meaning human beings do not distinguish between being and becoming, as Parmenides does. And so he says, only one tail of a path still remains, that esti, it is. And now, if you're having difficulty discerning a meaning from this, then you share that with every scholar who has ever written anything about it. No one knows what Parmenides means. There are a lot of people who have various interpretations, Heidegger and Hegel, and my teacher, Stanley Rosen, who I think is on the level of Heidegger and Hegel, has an interpretation, but they're all very different, and no one can claim that they've discovered Parmenides' memoirs and they have the true interpretation. It's very difficult, but there are aspects of his argument that are impossible, well, that seem impossible to deny, and that's why people expend so much effort upon it, because there's something in it. And we've run out of time. I'll very briefly make this last comment and then stop the recording. So he says, only one tail of a path remains, that esti, it is. There are very many signs on this path that being is ungenerated and indestructible, whole, single in kind, and unmoving, complete. It never was, nor will it be, since it is now altogether one continuous. And the reason, okay, so he's saying that being, what genuinely is, has the character of being unchanging and out of time, right? It's not generated and it's not destroyed. So why would you make that kind of statement, which seems bizarre and leads to all these bizarre notions of monism and so on? And he says, well, because if something is, it couldn't have had a coming to be. He says, what birth will you seek for it? How could it have grown from somewhere? Now, if you have something that is, it could only have come to be from what is not, from non-being. And the thesis of the first philosophers is that nothing can come from nothing. Otherwise, the world is not intelligible. Otherwise, it's open to divine powers and chance and so on. But they're asserting that it is intelligible. That's just a very, very brief hint of what's going on, and we'll spend more time next week on that. So we won't go any further with the grammar. We're just going to read some passages from Heraclitus, a bit more of the Parmenides, and then I'm going to discuss an interpretation by Aristotle and Plato of this understanding of philosophy. And yes, that will have exhausted our time. So I'll just stop the recording. I'm happy to stay on and discuss if there's any